Those are Liberal members of Parliament speaking on Parliament Hill today on a deadline day that some MPs gave Prime Minister Justin Trudeau to decide on his future as party leader. Just 18 hours after that deadline was issued last week, Trudeau reiterated he's not going anywhere. And now, as you heard there, some say they'd like to see caucus hold a secret ballot vote on his leadership. But there does not appear to be consensus on even that. So what happens now? Liberal MP for the Ontario riding of Markham-Stouffville, Helena Jaczek, is with me live in studio. Hi, Ms. Jaczek. Good to see you.
Very good to see you, too, Vashi.
I appreciate you making the time. A number of your colleagues there are calling for a secret ballot, essentially, to put this issue to rest. Are you in favor of that?
I'm very much in favor of a secret ballot. I think it's time that we clear the air. Since last Wednesday, as you know, there was a lengthy caucus meeting, and obviously people had a diversity of views. The Prime Minister did say, as he said publicly, of course, that he would reflect. The one thing that I think is really important, we certainly emerged united, that we all wanted to do everything we could to defeat Pierre Poilievre and the Conservatives in the next election. There was total unity on that. On the case of leadership, there is clearly a diversity of views, and I think we need, as I said, to clear the air and have a secret ballot.
What is, in your view, the prospect of one? Because my understanding, and please do correct me if I'm wrong, there really isn't any mechanism to force that, per se.
Exactly. The Liberal caucus did not adopt the Reform Act, as the Conservative Party did. So this would have to be something that is decided by, hopefully, the caucus chair. Presumably, the Prime Minister's office will have a view on the situation. But essentially, as you will no doubt have heard, the Deputy Prime Minister, Minister of Finance, Chrystia Freeland, has said there is a confidence that there is a majority of the caucus in favour of him staying. So I think it is sensible to test that out, to make sure that once that result comes out, that there is unity in the Liberal caucus.
Is it your view that caucus could decide as a whole, for example, the caucus chair, to hold that secret ballot without the rubber stamp or without the go-ahead or green light from the Prime Minister's office?
The process is not entirely clear to me. I know that the caucus chair has an executive committee made up of regional representation and so on. Presumably, they will be discussing how to proceed.
In your view, and I'm not sure the degree to which you've discussed this with your colleagues, is there a threshold by which that secret ballot would put these concerns to rest? For example, if a slim majority endorsed any kind of majority essentially would endorse the Prime Minister, as you mentioned, the Finance Minister claimed was the case, is that enough to kind of put the concerns to rest of those who don't?
My understanding is that usually it is the leader's prerogative to decide for themselves when they see the results. I noticed Jason Kenney, he apparently had 51.48% in favour, and he decided that that wasn't sufficient for him to continue as leader in Alberta.
So is this more, from your perspective, then, a way to communicate with the Prime Minister the truth of what essentially caucus feels at this moment?
I would hope that in a secret ballot, everyone would search their conscience, hear from their constituents, and reflect their views on their vote.
Do you have a sense among your caucus of which way that would go?
At this point, I see a number of people who have opinions that perhaps they're somewhat reluctant to express in a public forum. As you know, our caucus is made up of 152 individuals, and obviously not all of them spoke. So their voice has not yet been heard.
And I know that you have rules and restrictions around what you can talk about when it comes to what did happen in caucus. But if I could ask you directly, do you support the Prime Minister remaining as leader?
Well, I certainly believe that what happens in caucus stays in caucus. And at this point in time, I think that's where it should remain.
Beyond what's happening in caucus, do you have worries about the prospect for your party in the next election. You mentioned the unity around the question of Mr. Poilievre, and I think that's a fair assessment from every person I've tried to talk to behind the scenes and also from what I've seen very publicly, right? The one thing everyone can agree on right now is that they don't want to lose the next election, which is, I think, from my impression, the reason the majority of those MPs are speaking out even against the Prime Minister's leadership. It's not personal. It's a worry about what's going to happen in the next election. It's against that backdrop. I ask you, are you concerned about your party's prospects in the next election?
Well, I think we all look at the polls. There are certainly very discouraging signs in terms of approval amongst the population of the Liberal government, and there's a certain consistency between those polls as well. So it would be natural, I think, for any member of Parliament to be concerned about the next election.
I spoke to Wayne Long over the weekend, who said that there is a frustration, at least from his perspective, at like a feeling that the people in and around the Prime Minister, that isn't resonating. That those polls, that the prospect of what you're hearing at the door, the prospect of the next, like it's not punching through. Do you share that sentiment?
It's hard to say. The Prime Minister obviously is surrounded by people who must be informing him of what the polls are saying. He must be very aware how, as we've seen on Thursday, he came out and said, no, I'm remaining. So to what extent he's thinking that we all know he's a great campaigner. We know he has a desire to ensure there's a Liberal government in Canada. And he clearly thinks he can lead the party to victory. The caucus clearly, after our 3.5-hour caucus meeting, a number of individual MPs feel differently.
He also promised at the end of that caucus, and a number of MPs have shared this publicly on the record on my program, for example, Ken Hardy, that he would reflect on the considerations and the concerns that those members of caucus brought forward to him during that meeting. It was about 18 hours later that he said, I'm running again. A number of your colleagues were just clipped on our program saying that period of time was a bit of a disappointment to them. Some more strongly worded than others. Did you expect a longer period of reflection?
I think for all of us, when we're confronted with a difficult situation, it usually requires several days to reflect, especially if one has a little more time. Our Prime Minister is incredibly busy. He is all over the place, meeting people and so on. So I think presumably the desire to put today as after the weekend, a little bit more time to reflect, was a very reasonable approach.
So what does it say to you that weekend didn't even occur, that essentially the day after he was saying what he did?
Well, scrums are kind of high adrenaline situations, and I think he felt that he needed at that point in time to confirm that he intended to stay. But I wouldn't say that that would preclude further reflection as he has had over the last 4 days.
And do you think that reflection is actually occurring?
I honestly have no idea.
Do you hope that it is?
I would hope that he is considering what he heard from his caucus, from a number of people in his caucus. I think that is significant. Our duty is to report to the Prime Minister what is going on in our constituencies. And a number of people shared that information.
And if this, if a secret ballot, for example, weren't to take place and this sentiment continues to persist, like, okay, this one meeting is over, but there are more than 24 that came forward. Like, what is at stake in your view if that ends up happening?
I think to go back to clearing the air, I think a secret ballot where people express their innermost feelings on the subject with no fear of any repercussions or anything quite like that, when the result comes out, it becomes clear, for sure he's staying or he's not.
And would you be an advocate for that result being shared, or would that just be within caucus?
Oh, totally within caucus.
And the Prime Minister.
And the Prime Minister coming to a decision.
And just finally, have there been any conversations with anyone around the Prime Minister about the prospect of this happening?
I wouldn't know. It's simply something that is being talked about by a number of individuals. In fact, the first person who suggested it to me was a journalist as I approached before the Wednesday caucus meeting.
And the idea, is it fair to say the idea has picked up steam among caucus?
I would say so, yes.
Okay, Ms. Jaczek, I'll leave it there. Thank you very much for coming in. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Ashley.
That's Liberal MP Helena Jaczek.